You remember all those times that David was in need, his life was in danger, and he would call out to the Lord for advice? Sometimes he had a priest on hand, and the priest could bring up the Urim and Thummim, and they would ask questions of God, and sometimes God would just go in prayer and get an answer from God. This is not one of those times. This is a time when David has become very comfortable. He's not at war personally, doesn't have to be involved in any battles. He is the king over Israel and Judah, and life is pretty good. He's already received a promise from God that God would make his dynasty an everlasting dynasty, that he would put somebody on his throne that would always be there. And so, unfortunately for David, that gives him a sense of relaxation, and he doesn't turn to God as he might have at other times, and he makes some terrible mistakes. So we're just going to take a quick look at an account that most of us are familiar with, but I want us to point out some problems perhaps along the way that might have helped David avoid this predicament. Chapter 11, verse 1. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. Okay, so there's problem number one. He's gotten a little older. He's not as interested in going out to war, but bottom line is David's the king now. David doesn't have to go out to war. He has somebody appointed to take care of that for him. So people can sing about Joab now. They can get all happy about what a great warrior Joab is. And, you know, the two of them have been together for a while. They know one another. David trusts him. And so David just stays home. If David had gone to war, even if he had gone within a few miles of the front and had run things from the war zone, things would have been different. A couple of things about kings that we have to remember is that kings make the rules and therefore are not always subject to their own rules. Right? They see themselves sometimes as being above the rules. One time, Jesus and Peter were together near the temple, and Peter wanted to know if they were going to pay a tax. And Jesus said, well, of whom do kings gather their taxes? Do they gather their taxes from their own children or from other people's children? And of course the answer is, well, from other people's children. They have a different view of themselves than they have of everybody else. So now we can see how quickly the story of David and Bathsheba's adultery unfolds from there. I actually, on my Word program, there is a thing you can click on that tells you how many words are in the piece that you're writing. So when I write for the newspaper, I try to write about 268 words. That's my goal. So I'm always clicking up there and seeing how many words I've got. So I sectioned this part off to see how many words it took to describe the worst thing that people remember about King David. It took less than 100 words. Right? Here's the description of what happened. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Now, she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David saying, I'm pregnant. It doesn't take long, does it, to describe it? We don't know exactly how many days were involved in the process, but there are several getting off points for David in this account, even in this short account. There's plenty of ways David could have changed things. Number one, he got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace one evening. What was he getting up from bed in the evening for? Not middle of the night, not early in the morning. in the evening, David took a nap. And he got up from his nap and took a walk. Life was pretty nice for David. Right? Joab and the army are out doing battle. David is taking an afternoon nap and going for a walk. So his mindset, his approach to life in general had changed a great deal. Well, from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. His residence was up the hill. Right? I guess it's always kind of been that way. If you've got the house on the hill, then you're the big dog. Well, his house was up the hill. So from his roof, he could see her roof. And that was where typically people would take care of their personal business because it was elevated. Other people might be walking around the street down below, but they wouldn't be able to see what was going on the roof. He could see her well enough to know that she was a beautiful woman. And so David sent someone to find out about her. Now, so far in David's world, not in Becky's world, but in David's world, this is okay. Because David, if he had decided to marry a single woman, right, if this is a single, he just gets in touch with the father, figures out what the bride price might be, brings her home, everything's fine. He's already got a few wives, but he sees this one, and he sees this woman, and he wants this woman. So he sends a messenger to find out about her, and the messenger comes back and says, well, it's Bathsheba. She's the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. At this point, David could have just counted his losses and say, well, I'm sorry, she's beautiful. I wish I could have her, but I can't, and gone on about his business, because he could have had anybody in the kingdom because he's the king. He's making the rules. So David sent the messenger to get her, and he came to him, and he slept with her. Then we get this little parenthetical phrase, and we're not really sure what to do with it. She was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. The Old Testament has things to do at different times of the month for women. And I read several different authors, and none of them really seem to agree. At this point in time, according to the law of Moses, she was probably not required to do this immediately following her monthly cycle. Maybe a week after it was finished. The reason I was interested in the question at all was, she seems to be very fertile when she goes to visit David. Right? This is not what might have been a casual fling that could have been swept under the rug, ends up being a pregnancy. So she's in a bad situation. David's in a bad situation. But we never came up with a good answer as to what the timing might have been as far as she was concerned. But she gets back in touch with David sometime after that and says, I'm pregnant. So it doesn't take very long for them to find out that they've got a real problem on their hands, or at least David does, or maybe just Bathsheba for that matter. Again, David's king. David can do pretty much whatever David wants to do. Now, Bathsheba was in the bed with David. She committed adultery with David. But how do you say no to the king? I don't think it was a suggestion that she joined him, but a summons from the king. Right, verse 6. So David sent this word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. So he gives him this little interview about how things are on the front. And, of course, Uriah answers the questions. And then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all of his master's servants and would not go down to his house. So we find out something in a hurry about Uriah. It's hard not to like this guy. He has come home, and his king has told him, why don't you go home and take a bath? What does David really mean? Why don't you go home and sleep with your wife? Why don't you go home and do what a man would normally do coming back from having been separated from his wife, and not just any old wife, but his beautiful wife. Uriah will not do it. He has too much character to go home and be with his wife. So there's a gift that is sent. We don't know whether Bathsheba receives that gift, whether Bathsheba knows that Uriah is in town. We don't know anything beyond what we're told in the text. But Uriah would not go home. The point here, and probably the reason we're given that little parenthesis, is to tell us that she's very early in the pregnancy. And what David is hoping is that if Uriah goes home and sleeps with his wife, that they'll think that it's Uriah's baby. And Uriah will be happy, and Bathsheba's reputation will be saved, and he, as the king, will have no more problem, no more fallout. But Uriah will not go home. Okay? Verse 10. So David was told Uriah did not go home. So he asked Uriah, haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home? Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. Now, if we had any question that these two men were on the same wavelength, that answers the question. Right? Uriah says, I'm not going to go to my house and eat and drink and make love to my wife. Why would you think that I would do that? Because in the field, there are Joab and Uriah and the other soldiers, and what else? The ark. They've taken the ark out into the field again. I don't know how often this happened, but we know the last time they tried it, it was a disaster. Remember, Saul took it into the field and the Philistines stole the thing, and it was separated from the Israelites for several years. Finally, David gets the ark, brings it back to Jerusalem, and now he sends it out with Joab. So David is in Jerusalem. The ark is in a tent out in the field. And Uriah's sense of right and wrong is so strong that he says, if they're out there in the field sleeping like that, I can't betray them by going home. Not going to do it. And so David comes up with a really good plan. I'll get him drunk. If I get him drunk, then he'll go home to his wife. So verse 12, David said to him, stay here one more day. Tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next day. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He did not go home. So it doesn't matter what David is trying to get done. He's not going to be able to accomplish it. Uriah is never going to allow it to happen. He's not going home. In your mind, you might be putting together a list of things that David did that we don't like in this particular account, because there are several of them. Verse 14, in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. Now let that soak in a minute. Uriah, it's none of your business, right? You just carry the letter. He's a soldier. He does what he's told to do because the king told him to do it. So he takes the letter and he brings it to Joab, and in the note he writes, put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest, then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die. Okay, that's the king. That's your commander-in-chief. You're the general in the field, but the king of your country just gave you directions on what you need to do. So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. So now our plan not only includes Uriah, but it includes other people in the army that are killed in this incursion. So Joab has one last man in his army that has Uriah's dedication. Right? If you could interview everybody in Joab's army and find out how dedicated they were to the mission, to the war in general, to the king, to Joab, to the Ark of the Covenant, I doubt if you'd find anybody in the whole army that would be as dedicated to what they're doing. And so now he has killed probably one of the most dedicated individuals in his army. And Joab now has to send a message back to David to let him know that he has completed his mission. And he dupes the messenger so that the messenger will say the right thing, so that David will get the right message. And so verse 18, Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed the messenger, when you have finished giving the king this account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up. And he may ask you, why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerubbesheth? Didn't a woman drop an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died in Thebez? Why did you get so close to the wall? If he asks you this, then say to him, moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. So just throw that in. If David says, well, why did you get so close? Then say, oh, well, by the way, Uriah the Hittite is dead as well. So the messenger set out. When he arrived, he told David everything Joab had sent him to say. The messenger said to David, the men overpowered us and came out against us in the open, but we drove them back to the entrance of the city gate. Then the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, and some of the king's men died. Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. David said to the messenger, say this to Joab, don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. And say this so that you can be an encouragement to Joab. So the runner that's going back and forth now has a mission from the king to go tell Joab that everything's okay, and his job isn't just orders from the king. He gets to play a part in something important. The general needs to be reassured. He needs to be encouraged in his battle. So David says, well, you can go and you can be encouragement to Joab. Tell him I said that everything's going to be okay. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. And so we're all familiar with the way that all of this plays out. But let's just kind of make a quick list. Things that David did that he should not have done. What do you got? He should not have stayed in Jerusalem. He should have been with the ark. He should have been with Joab. He could have, would have, had been going into battle. What's number 2? Can't really fault him for taking a nap. I take afternoon naps. Is that sinful? If it is, I'm in trouble. What else? When he saw Bathsheba on her roof, what could he have done? Keep walking. Right? Don't give an opportunity to stop and stare. Used to have in our New Testament class, we would talk about Jesus' description of spiritual adultery. If a man looks at a woman to lust after her, he's committed adultery already with her in his heart. We used to talk about that. What does that mean? And we would ask the girls, what does it mean to you that a man would be lusting after you? What would be the difference between a guy is attracted to me and maybe he wants to ask me out on a date and this guy's leering, or this guy's, what's the difference in your minds? And we would have some wonderful discussions. And they probably never thought about it as being a problem or how they could approach the problem if they did. So David could have just left the subject. He could have just moved and not kept looking. When he found out she was married, once again, he could have said, oh, too bad, and moved on with his life. met her in the marketplace and said hi sometime, but not called for her to come to his home. Then he lied about it to Uriah. He didn't specifically lie, but he tried to cover it up. So he was involved in a cover-up. Uriah wouldn't go for the cover-up, so David decides that he will conspire to commit murder. So David and Joab get in a conspiracy together to commit murder. So now how many people has David involved in getting what he wants? He's got a servant that's running back and forth getting his information, calling Bathsheba to him. Does that guy ever say, now king, you realize that she's married to somebody else? No, you don't tell the king no. The king does what the king wants to do. You've got Joab, who now is involved in David's sin. Does Joab say, now friend, we've known each other a long time, and it's really not right for you to have another man's wife? No. He just does what David tells him to do and has Uriah killed in battle. And in killing him, Joab has to kill even more of his warriors. Guys that would go into that kind of situation and fight against those kind of odds, you don't want to lose them. You don't want to just sacrifice those guys. But Joab does. Finally, you end up with a situation where David has killed off the husband, has impregnated the wife, and he has the opportunity now to take her for his own wife, since after all, Uriah is dead. How long do you think she had to mourn before she went to David? We have one other example. David went and asked for help, and I've lost the guy's name all of a sudden. But the guy would not help him. The wife comes to David and says, you know what? He just doesn't know what he's doing. And she brought out some things and helped David. The man ends up getting killed. 7 days. They wait 7 days. And then she joins David, and he takes her as a wife. I wonder if Bathsheba waited 7 days, 1 week. Right? So everything happens so quickly. And we end this chapter with, and so she became his wife and bore him a son. Now, how many of us know what happens next? Yeah, things get bad in a hurry. And from this point on in David's career, he has children that commit treason against him. He has children that attack one another. We have killings and sexual assault and all kinds of things happening in David's family after this time. This is the beginning of a long period of difficult things for King David. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. So David may be the king, and he may be able to do whatever he wants to do in his kingdom, but the one who gave him the kingdom is displeased. And so Lord willing, we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. Questions or thoughts?